Today it was time to take my Benchmade 748 Narrows out of the improvised salt fog chamber, where it was hanging literally for 30 hours. By now, this knife has been thoroughly abused, as you can see in the videos posted under playlist Why Benchmade. I bought these two knives on the same day. One was being tested and the other one stayed in a sealed box until now. I call it my control sample knife. I will be comparing them side by side, so you, my viewers, can see clearly what hard work and harsh environment can do to a knife. And here they are side by side. Can you tell which knife is which? Looks pretty obvious, but let's zoom in so you can see it even better. Oh, what a difference can 72 hours make in a knife's life. What you see is not quote-unquote patina. This is iron oxide or rust. Can you tell which side of the knife was facing the corrosive solution and which one was upward? If you recall from the previous video, the side with the clip on it was hanging down toward the surface of the liquid. That is the more corroded side. One of the thumb studs looks brown, yet the crossbar looks like new, but the pivot screw doesn't. Also, there is a Viking beard of iron oxide growing out of the corner there. Is the torsion spring supposed to be black? Easy to check. As I feared, shiny on the left, black on the right. The fact that it darkened like that may be evidence that it is made out of carbon steel. Whatever that coating is on the studs, it changed color. Can you see it here? Not quite as bad on the other side, but still pretty obvious. One of the videos about this knife said it wasn't anodizing, so I'm wondering what kind of coating is it. The pocket clip has suffered the most on this knife. Some of you may find it disturbing. I don't know what was going through my head when I was filming it, but somehow here I decided that's the right time to do the paper cut test. Maybe I was thinking, let's see what this tortured knife can do before I clean it. And as you can see, it's still performing quite well. I attribute it to the edge retention properties of M390 and overall geometry of the blade. And now it's time to try the action for the first time since it came out of the salt fog chamber. Sorry, I mean Ziploc bag. I remember when it first came out of the box, the action was impeccable. But I don't have to tell you, I can just show you. Easily drops open and snaps locked. If you haven't seen my oak chopping and batoning video, here's the link. Please check it out. This lock is pretty incredible. Not so much when it has salt deposits caked on it. Oops, the beard came off. Crunchy. Time to give this knife a spa treatment. It deserves it. I'm using a little bit of lubricating and penetrating oil called gun oil and basic run-of-the-mill paper towel. There's no need to use anything more aggressive than a paper towel or a piece of cloth. The penetrating oil will continue to do its job even after you stop rubbing. Using steel wool or even synthetic scrubber may break the pattern of the vertical grinds on the flat portion of the blade. The main and the top bevels are treated with a stone-washed or maybe tumbled finish, which creates a much more corrosion-resistant surface than the flat grind on the top of the blade. I douse the hardware in oil so that it can start penetrating while I'm continuing to rub the blade. This knife is so thin, I am worried about how many threads does the pivot screw have. The blade actually turned out better than expected. As for the rest of it, see for yourself. The top or right thumb stud completely lost its finish. The clip lost a lot of color, but there's almost no pitting. These two facts make me think that the coating itself is reacting with a corrosive solution and not the base metal. And the scales, the frame, there are no scales on this knife. Looks like new after thorough scrubbing. Now I understand the meaning of the words downside. This side that has a little bit of pitting was facing downward toward the corrosive solution. Okay, the outside is done. Next, I need to disassemble and clean the inside of this knife. If you like solving puzzles like reassembling axis lock knives previously made by Benchmade, this knife will be a disappointment. It's too easy to reassemble. Benchmade must have retired the gorilla who was dousing hardware in Loctite on other models, or maybe they hired fresh personnel just for this production line. But the hardware came out surprisingly easy. This is the underside of the clip. Seriously, Benchmade, for the money you could have provided a milled titanium clip like you did on the Anthem. I think this knife is going to be a flop for Benchmade, and a big part of the reason for that will be this cheap, boring, and obsolete pocket clip. Disassembling this knife is incredibly easy. You remove 2 screws holding the frame to the spacers and then remove the pivot screw and the top plate comes off. All you need is a screwdriver with T10 and T6 bits. I was worried about the threads corroding, judging by how the head of the pivot screw looked, but the threads were okay. There's just a little corrosion under the head. The pivot stud can be just pushed out. It did not corrode at all. I'm surprised. I wonder what the difference is. You can now slide the blade out. One bearing is recessed into the blade and the other one into the frame. This is brilliant. The torsion spring decided to jump when I pulled the top plate off, so be careful if you're doing it at home. The crossbar torsion spring looks like a miniature copy of the AR-15 hammer spring. Somehow it got blued by the corrosive fog inside the bag. Next I need to clean out the salt deposit inside the frame. Just in case you're wondering what the ball bearings look like. What got me worried is it looks like the halves of a frame are no longer flat. When I put them together, you can clearly see there's a curvature between them. Do you think this is normal, my friends? Hopefully it reassembles correctly once I start putting it together. The front spacer is press fit into the half of the frame, so I only need to attach the back spacers using 2 screws. To correctly reinstall the crossbar, make sure that the cutouts on the flanges are pointing away from the pivot hole toward the edge of the scale. Next, I'm installing, or more accurately, placing the torsion spring and its pin in a milled indentation on this scale. These milled pockets are of different length on 2 scales, so make sure that the long leg goes into the long pocket. Then just drop in the other half of the frame. It will line up with the spacers and pop in very nicely, holding everything together. Take a look to make sure everything is aligned properly and the spring is not pinched, and you're ready to screw it all back together. An interesting detail, I believe the small screws are made out of titanium, nor did they corrode or discolored at all. It's good to know that Benchmade cares. Please pardon my sarcasm. In one of my previous lives, I was designing industrial equipment for a living, and let me tell you, this knife is geared for automatic assembly. If I was a Benchmade worker, I would be worried. Call it a hunch, but I think that's the future of the company. And sadly, the only way for an American company to come to the same level of quality as famous Chinese manufacturers like Riyadh. By now, the most observant of my viewers probably noticed that I did not reapply Loctite to the screws, or for that matter, to the pivot screw. It is because the pivot screw could be fully torqued. It bottoms out on the stud and does not pinch the frame. And the small screws will be held in place by abrasiveness of the titanium, which will sort of serve as its own Loctite. Reinstalling the bearings is no trouble at all. Slide one into the recess on the frame. It will line itself up with almost no effort on your part. Place the second bearing into the recess on the blade and simply slide the blade into place. The alignment feature for the pivot stud is on the bottom half of the frame. Place the pivot stud on a firm surface. Lining up the alignment features, bring the frame assembly onto it and drop it in place. The position of the top bearing may have to be corrected for which I used just a toothpick. This is a lot simpler and less time consuming than the older Benchmade designs. All that's left to do is re-engaging the torsion spring. For that, put the blade in an open position, push the crossbar forwardmost position, and press down onto the loop of the spring. It'll click into position and engage immediately. Hard to believe, but it was harder to describe this action verbally than to actually do it. I'm not even sure I needed to wait putting the pivot screw back in, but I did it in this order. The recommended torque for this screw is 16 to 19 inch-pounds. Next, I'm checking for function and free play. And of course, as any knife enthusiast should, for the blade centering. Interestingly enough, both knives were favoring left side of the frame. So to fix that, I simply loosen the two screws on that side, then press the blade down toward that side in an open position, and then retighten the screws. That makes the alignment perfect. Lastly, reinstall the pocket clip. I'm impressed with how this knife is engineered, but by pricing it that high, they created a lot of room for the competition to come in and replicate this design at much lower cost. I don't think any of the features of this knife are patentable, and therefore the design is not protected. The aftermath. Coating is gone on one of the studs, and it's darker on all other coated hardware. There's an extra chip on the blade. There's 3 chips now, probably as a result of my batoning. The dots on the blade that you saw earlier were not pits. It turned out to be just coloration. Bottom line, my friends, is I failed. I failed to fail this knife. The edge chipping and discoloration is a minor fixable stuff, which brings me to a question for you. The question will go out to my public subscribers via YouTube post, and it will help me decide what to do next with this knife. To participate, you have to be a subscriber and have your subscription set to public view in order to participate. Thank you.